Prince Alexander stood in the grand marble hallway of Valdoria Palace, his small fists clenched at his sides as tears streamed down his 7-year-old face. The ornate chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the walls, but the young prince noticed none of the usual beauty that surrounded him. His world had just been shattered by words he never expected to hear. "You're not my mother," he had shouted moments earlier, his voice echoing through the private drawing room where Queen Isabella had been sitting with several palace advisors. The meeting had come to an abrupt halt, and now the adults whispered in hushed tones, while Alexander ran from the room, his royal tutors calling after him. The kingdom of Valdoria had been Alexander's entire world since birth. Nestled between the mountains of Central Europe, it was a small but prosperous nation known for its ancient traditions and modern progressive values. The palace, with its hundreds of rooms and sprawling gardens, had been his playground and sanctuary. Queen Isabella, whom he had always called Mother, had raised him with warmth and love, reading him bedtime stories and teaching him about the responsibilities that would one day be his. But everything changed 3 days ago when Alexander overheard a conversation between 2 kitchen staff members. They spoke in whispers about secrets, about his real mother, about arrangements made before his birth. The words confused him, frightened him, and planted seeds of doubt that grew with each passing hour. Lady Margaret, his beloved nanny who had cared for him since infancy, found him hiding behind the ancient oak tree in the palace courtyard. Her kind eyes were filled with concern as she approached the distraught prince. She had witnessed the outburst in the drawing room and understood the turmoil in the young boy's heart. "Your Highness," she said gently, sitting on the stone bench nearby, "would you like to tell me what's troubling you?" Alexander looked up at her, his blue eyes red from crying. Lady Margaret had always been his confidant, the one person in the palace who seemed to understand him completely. She never spoke to him with the formal reverence that others used, but rather with genuine care and affection. "They said she's not really my mother," Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible above the fountain's gentle bubbling. "The kitchen ladies were talking about my real mother. They said Queen Isabella took me when I was a baby." Lady Margaret's heart ached for the confused child. She had been dreading this day, knowing that palace secrets rarely stayed hidden forever. The truth about Alexander's parentage was one of the most closely guarded secrets in Valdoria, known only to a select few within the royal household. The story began 7 years earlier when Princess Catherine, Queen Isabella's younger sister, had fallen deeply in love with a commoner named David. Catherine was spirited and independent, much like Alexander would later become. She refused to marry the foreign prince her parents had chosen for her, and instead eloped with David to a small coastal town. When Catherine became pregnant, the royal family faced a scandal that threatened the monarchy's reputation. Traditional Valdorian law stated that any child born to a royal family member outside of approved marriage would be considered illegitimate and could never inherit the throne. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella made a difficult decision to protect both Catherine and her unborn child. Catherine agreed to give birth in secret at a private estate outside the kingdom. The plan was for Queen Isabella, who had been unable to have children of her own, to raise the child as her own legitimate heir. Catherine would be free to live her life with David, and the child would have a secure future as the rightful prince of Valdoria. The arrangement worked perfectly for 7 years. Catherine visited the palace regularly as Alexander's aunt, watching her son grow from a distance. She and David had built a quiet life together, and Catherine found peace in knowing her child was loved and well cared for. Queen Isabella had embraced motherhood completely, and her love for Alexander was genuine and deep. But palace walls have ears, and servants notice everything. Over the years, small details had been observed and discussed. Some noticed that Alexander bore little resemblance to Queen Isabella but had striking similarities to Princess Catherine. Others remembered the Queen's sudden announcement of pregnancy after years of failed attempts to conceive. As Alexander sat in the garden with Lady Margaret, his mind raced with questions. He thought about the times Princess Catherine visited and how she always seemed particularly interested in his studies and activities. He remembered how her eyes would light up when he showed her his drawings or told her about his adventures in the palace gardens. "Is it true?" Alexander asked Lady Margaret, his voice trembling. "Is Princess Catherine my real mother?" Lady Margaret chose her words carefully. She had sworn an oath to protect the royal family's secrets, but she also loved Alexander like her own grandson. She could see the pain and confusion in his young face and knew that lies would only make things worse.
"Alexander," she said softly, "there are some things about your birth that are complicated.
But what matters most is that you are loved by many people who care about you deeply. Queen Isabella loves you as her own son, and she has been the best mother anyone could ask for." "But why did they lie to me?" Alexander asked, fresh tears forming in his eyes. "Why didn't they tell me the truth?" Lady Margaret pulled the young prince into her arms, feeling his small body shake with emotion. Sometimes adults make difficult choices to protect the people they love. Queen Isabella and Princess Catherine both wanted what was best for you. They wanted you to have a stable life and a bright future. As they sat together in the garden, Lady Margaret began to tell Alexander the story she had promised never to reveal. She spoke about love and sacrifice, about difficult choices made with the best intentions. She explained how Princess Catherine had given up her rights as a mother so that Alexander could inherit the throne and lead their kingdom one day. Alexander listened intently, trying to understand the complex emotions and decisions that had shaped his life before he was even born. Part of him felt betrayed by the years of secrecy, but another part began to understand the depth of love that had motivated everyone's actions. That evening, Alexander sat in his chambers, staring out at the gardens where he had played countless games and dreamed of his future as king. The revelation about his parentage had changed everything, yet somehow, nothing felt different about the palace walls that surrounded him or the people who cared for him. Queen Isabella appeared in his doorway, her face showing the strain of the day's events. She had spent hours with her advisors, discussing how to handle the situation and what it might mean for the monarchy. But her first priority was the heartbroken child who had called her mother for 7 years. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Alexander nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Queen Isabella sat beside him on his bed, the same bed where she had read him countless bedtime stories and comforted him through nightmares and childhood fears. "I heard what happened today," she said gently. "I imagine you have many questions and feelings that are difficult to sort through." "Why didn't you tell me?" Alexander asked, finally looking at her. "I thought you were my real mother. I thought everything was true." Queen Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, I want you to know that every moment of being your mother has been real for me. When you took your first steps, when you said your first words, when you learned to ride your horse, those were all real moments between a mother and her son. The love I feel for you is completely real. But you're not really my mother," Alexander said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "Being a mother isn't just about giving birth to a child," Queen Isabella replied. "It's about loving them, caring for them, guiding them, and being there for every important moment in their life. I have been your mother in every way that matters since the day you were born." Alexander considered her words, remembering all the times she had comforted him, celebrated his achievements, and helped him through difficult moments. She had been the one to teach him about kindness and responsibility. She had been the one to sing to him when he was sick and to encourage him when he faced challenges. "What about Princess Catherine?" he asked quietly. Queen Isabella smiled sadly. "Catherine is your birth mother, and she loves you very much. She made an incredible sacrifice so that you could have the life you deserve. She visits as often as she can, and she treasures every moment she gets to spend with you, even though you don't know her as your mother." As the night grew later, Queen Isabella tucked Alexander into bed, just as she had done every night for 7 years. The routine felt both familiar and strange now that he knew the truth about their relationship. "Will things be different now?" Alexander asked as she turned off the lights. "Only if you want them to be," Queen Isabella replied. "You will always be my son, and I will always be here for you. Nothing can change the love between us." As Alexander drifted off to sleep, his mind was filled with new understanding about his family and his place in the world. The revelation had been shocking and painful, but it had also opened his eyes to the depth of love and sacrifice that surrounded him. Tomorrow would bring new questions and new conversations, but tonight he felt the comfort of knowing he was cherished by people who had made difficult choices out of love for him. The morning sun streamed through Alexander's bedroom windows, but the young prince remained in bed long after his usual wake-up time. The events of the previous day felt like a strange dream, but the heavy feeling in his chest reminded him that everything he had learned was painfully real. Lady Margaret knocked softly on his door, carrying his breakfast on a silver tray as she had done every morning since he was old enough to eat solid food.
"Good morning, Your Highness," she said warmly, setting the tray on his desk. "I thought you might prefer to eat in your room today." Alexander sat up slowly, his hair messy from a restless night of sleep. "Lady Margaret, will you tell me more about my real mother? About Princess Catherine?" Lady Margaret settled into the comfortable chair beside his bed. Over the years, she had collected countless memories and stories about Catherine's visits and her reactions to Alexander's growth and development. She had watched Catherine's face light up with pride and joy during royal ceremonies, where she sat in the audience, observing her son from a distance. "Your birth mother is a remarkable woman," Lady Margaret began. "She has your same curiosity about the world and your love for adventure. When she was your age, she used to sneak out of the palace to explore the village markets and talk to the common people. She wanted to understand how everyone in the kingdom lived, not just the royals." Alexander's eyes widened with interest. This sounded exactly like something he would want to do, though his tutors had always discouraged such independent exploration. "Princess Catherine was also incredibly brave," Lady Margaret continued. "When she was 16, she once climbed the highest tower in the palace to rescue a bird that had become trapped in the rafters. Everyone told her it was too dangerous, but she couldn't bear to leave the poor creature suffering." As Lady Margaret shared these stories, Alexander began to see similarities between himself and the woman he was just beginning to understand as his birth mother. He thought about his own love for animals and his tendency to act impulsively when he felt something was unfair or wrong. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Queen Isabella was meeting with King Ferdinand and their most trusted advisors. The secret that had been carefully guarded for 7 years was now known to Alexander, and they needed to decide how to proceed. The kingdom's laws and traditions had never addressed a situation quite like this one. Lord Chancellor Williams, an elderly man who had served the royal family for decades, expressed his concerns about the potential political implications. If word spreads about Prince Alexander's true parentage, it could create questions about his legitimacy as heir to the throne. Some might argue that he cannot inherit because Princess Catherine was not married within approved royal protocols when he was born. Queen Isabella felt a surge of protective anger. "Alexander is my son in every way that matters. He has been raised as the legitimate heir, and he will remain so. I will not allow political maneuvering to hurt an innocent child who had no say in the circumstances of his birth." King Ferdinand, who had always been a fair and thoughtful ruler, considered all sides of the issue. "We must think about what is best for Alexander and for the kingdom. The truth is now known to him, and eventually it may become public knowledge. We should prepare for that possibility and ensure that our decisions protect both our family and our people." As these important conversations took place, Alexander spent his morning with his regular tutor, Professor Henrik, though his mind was far from his usual lessons about mathematics and history. Professor Henrik noticed the boy's distraction and gently asked if something was troubling him. "Professor," Alexander said quietly, "do you think it's possible to love someone even if they're not related to you by blood?" Professor Henrik was a wise man who had educated 3 generations of royals. He suspected that Alexander's question was connected to the whispered rumors that had begun circulating among the palace staff. "Alexander," he replied thoughtfully, "some of the strongest families I know are built on love and choice rather than just blood relations. Love is not limited by genetics. It grows from shared experiences, mutual care, and the decision to be there for each other through good times and difficult times." These words gave Alexander some comfort as he struggled to understand his complex family situation. He began to think about all the people in the palace who cared for him. Lady Margaret, Professor Henrik, the kitchen staff who always saved him extra cookies, and the gardeners who let him help plant flowers. None of these people were related to him, but they had all contributed to making his childhood happy and secure. That afternoon, Princess Catherine arrived at the palace for what had been planned as a routine visit. She often came to attend royal functions or to discuss charitable work with Queen Isabella. However, this visit would be different from all the others. Queen Isabella had sent word that it was time for Catherine to meet her son as his mother, not just as his aunt. Catherine's hands trembled as she walked through the familiar palace corridors. She had dreamed of this moment and dreaded it in equal measure. For 7 years, she had watched Alexander grow from a distance, celebrating his accomplishments silently and worrying about him during his challenges.
She had memorized every detail of his face during their brief interactions, and had kept a secret collection of photographs and drawings that captured his childhood milestones. In her small house by the sea, Catherine had a room dedicated to Alexander. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about royal events he had attended, school reports that Lady Margaret secretly shared with her, and artwork he had created that somehow found its way to her through trusted intermediaries. David, her partner, had been incredibly understanding and supportive of her need to stay connected to her son, even from afar. Alexander was in the palace garden when Catherine arrived. He was sitting by the fountain throwing small stones into the water and watching the ripples spread outward. Lady Margaret had told him that his birth mother was coming to see him, and he felt nervous about meeting her properly for the first time. When Catherine appeared on the garden path, Alexander looked up and immediately recognized something familiar in her face. She had the same blue eyes that he saw in the mirror every morning, and her smile reminded him of his own. She approached slowly, giving him time to study her and process his feelings. "Hello, Alexander," Catherine said softly, sitting on the bench across from him. "I know this must be very confusing and overwhelming for you." Alexander nodded, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to run to her, drawn by an instinct he didn't fully understand. Another part of him felt shy and uncertain about this stranger who was somehow central to his existence. "I want you to know," Catherine continued, "that giving you to Isabella to raise was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most loving thing I could do for you. I wanted you to have every opportunity and advantage that comes with being the rightful heir to the throne." "Were you sad when you gave me away?" Alexander asked, his 7-year-old directness cutting through any attempt at diplomatic conversation. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I was heartbroken, Alexander. I cried every day for months. But I was also happy because I knew you would be safe and loved and have a wonderful life. Queen Isabella had wanted a child for so long, and I knew she would be an amazing mother to you." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds singing in the palace trees and the gentle splash of the fountain. Alexander studied Catherine's face, looking for more similarities between them, and trying to understand the complex emotions he was feeling. "Do you love me?" he asked suddenly. "Oh, Alexander," Catherine whispered, "I have loved you every single day since before you were born. I love you so much that I was willing to let someone else raise you so you could have the best possible life. That's how much I love you." Alexander stood up and walked over to Catherine, looking directly into her eyes. "May I hug you?" Catherine opened her arms, and Alexander stepped into them, feeling an immediate sense of connection and belonging. As she held him, Catherine breathed in the scent of his hair and marveled at how tall and strong he had become. This was the embrace she had dreamed about for 7 years. "Will I be able to see you more now?" Alexander asked as they held each other. "That depends on many things," Catherine replied honestly, "but I hope so. I would love to be part of your life in whatever way is possible." As the afternoon progressed, Catherine told Alexander about her life by the sea, about David and their quiet happiness, and about her work helping children in coastal villages receive better education. Alexander shared his favorite palace adventures, his love for his horse Thunder, and his dreams of being a good king someday. When Queen Isabella joined them in the garden, the three of them sat together in an unusual but somehow natural family configuration. Isabella had been nervous about this meeting, worried that Alexander might reject her in favor of his birth mother. But as she watched the easy interaction between Catherine and Alexander, she felt grateful rather than threatened. "Catherine," Isabella said warmly, "thank you for giving me the privilege of being Alexander's mother. These 7 years have been the greatest joy of my life." Catherine smiled at her sister. "And thank you for loving him so completely. I always knew you would be perfect for each other." Alexander looked between the two women who had shaped his life through their love and sacrifice. "So now I have 2 mothers, if you'd like to think of it that way." Isabella replied, "You have Catherine, who gave you life, and me, who has raised you. We both love you more than anything in the world. And David?" Alexander asked Catherine. "Would he want to meet me too?" Catherine's face lit up. "David has heard about you every day since you were born. He would be honored to meet you if you'd like to meet him. As evening approached and Catherine prepared to leave, Alexander felt sad to see her go, but also excited about the possibility of getting to know her better. The confusion and pain from the previous day had been replaced by curiosity and a growing sense of having an even larger family than he had realized. That night, as Queen Isabella tucked him into bed, Alexander seemed more at peace than he had been since learning the truth about his parentage. "Mother," he said, using the title he had always used for Isabella. "I'm glad Catherine is my birth mother, but I'm also glad you're my real mother. Is that okay?" Isabella kissed his forehead. "That's more than okay, my darling boy. That's perfect." 2 weeks had passed since Alexander's first meeting with Catherine as his birth mother, and the young prince had been adjusting to his expanded understanding of family with remarkable resilience. The palace routine had returned to normal, but with new additions that made Alexander's days more interesting and meaningful. Catherine had begun visiting twice a week, and Alexander looked forward to these encounters with growing excitement. During one of these visits, Catherine brought David to meet Alexander for the first time. Alexander had been curious about this man who had chosen to love his birth mother and accept her complicated situation with grace and understanding. David was a gentle soul with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. He made boats for the fishing families in their coastal village and had taught himself to read and write so he could help Catherine with her education projects. "I've heard so many wonderful things about you, Your Highness," David said when they were introduced in the palace garden. He had practiced the formal greeting, wanting to show proper respect, but Alexander immediately put him at ease. "You don't have to call me that," Alexander said with a grin. "Catherine says you build boats. Could you teach me how to make one?" David's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I would love to teach you about boat building. It's one of my favorite things in the world." As they spent the afternoon together, Alexander discovered that David had a wonderful sense of humor and an endless supply of stories about life by the sea. David told him about dolphins that played near their house and storms that created magnificent displays of lightning over the water. Alexander was fascinated by this glimpse into a completely different way of living. Queen Isabella watched from her office window as Alexander, Catherine, and David worked together to build a small wooden boat using tools that David had brought from his workshop. She felt a complex mixture of emotions: happiness that Alexander was forming bonds with his birth family, but also a touch of fear that he might prefer their simpler, freer lifestyle to palace life. Her concerns were addressed that evening when Alexander burst into her private sitting room, dirty and exhausted but glowing with excitement. "Mother, look what we made!" he exclaimed, holding up a perfectly crafted miniature sailboat. "David taught me how to sand the wood and attach the sail, and Catherine showed me how to paint the hull. We're going to test it in the palace pond tomorrow." Isabella admired the boat and praised Alexander's craftsmanship, but what made her heart sing was his continued use of mother when addressing her. Despite learning about his birth parents and forming relationships with them, Alexander had not wavered in considering Isabella his real mother. "David says that when I'm older, maybe I could visit their house by the sea and learn to build a real boat," Alexander continued enthusiastically. "Would that be okay? Could I do that sometime?" Isabella smiled at his excitement. "I think that sounds like a wonderful adventure for the future." As the weeks passed, Alexander's expanded family situation became more natural and comfortable for everyone involved. Catherine and David would often stay for dinner when they visited, and these meals became some of Alexander's favorite times. The conversation flowed easily between discussions of kingdom affairs, village life, and Alexander's education and interests. During one particularly memorable dinner, Alexander asked David about the most difficult boat he had ever built. David told the story of creating a special rescue boat for the village's emergency services, a project that required new techniques and materials he had never worked with before. "I was scared I would fail," David admitted. "But sometimes we have to try difficult things, even when we're not sure we can succeed. The village needed that boat, and I was the only person available to build it." "What happened?" Alexander asked, completely absorbed in the story. "Well, it took me 3 times as long as I expected, and I made many mistakes along the way. But eventually, I figured out solutions to each problem, and the boat turned out even better than I had originally planned. It's been used in dozens of rescues over the past few years." Alexander thought about this story often in the following days. He began to see parallels between David's boat-building challenges and his own situation as a young prince learning to navigate complex family relationships and future responsibilities. Professor Henrik noticed that Alexander's perspective on his studies had shifted since meeting his birth family. The prince approached his lessons with new questions about how royal decisions affected common people and what responsibilities came with leadership. "Professor," Alexander said during a history lesson about previous Valdorian kings, "how can a ruler make sure they understand what life is really like for people who aren't royal?" "That's one of the most important challenges any leader faces, Alexander. Some of the greatest kings and queens in history made it a priority to listen to their people and understand their daily struggles and hopes. Like how Catherine goes to villages to help with schools. Your birth mother has chosen to use her royal connections to improve education for children who wouldn't otherwise have access to good schools. That's an excellent example of using privilege to serve others." These conversations helped Alexander begin to envision how he might combine the best aspects of both sides of his family when he eventually became king. From Queen Isabella and the palace, he was learning about diplomacy, tradition, and the formal responsibilities of leadership. From Catherine and David, he was discovering the importance of understanding common people's lives and finding practical solutions to real problems. One afternoon, Alexander made a request that surprised everyone. He asked if Catherine and David could attend his upcoming birthday celebration at the palace. Traditionally, royal birthday parties were formal affairs with carefully selected guest lists of nobles and diplomatic families. "I want them there," Alexander told Queen Isabella firmly. "They're part of my family now, and it wouldn't feel right to celebrate without them." Isabella realized that this request represented a significant moment in Alexander's development. He was asserting his own vision of what his family should look like, regardless of traditional protocols. After consulting with King Ferdinand, they decided to honor Alexander's wishes. The birthday celebration became a unique blend of formal royal tradition and warm family gathering. Catherine and David were officially presented to the court as the prince's extended family, and their presence added an element of authenticity and joy that impressed many of the guests. During the traditional birthday speech that Alexander was expected to give, he surprised everyone by departing from the prepared remarks his tutors had written. "Thank you all for celebrating with me today," Alexander began, standing confidently before the assembled crowd. "This year has taught me that family can take many different forms, and that love is what makes a family strong. I'm grateful to Queen Isabella, who has been my mother in every way that matters. I'm grateful to Princess Catherine, who gave me life and made difficult choices so I could have opportunities. And I'm grateful to David, who has shown me that wisdom and kindness come in many different forms." He paused, looking around the room at all the faces watching him. "When I become king someday, I want to remember everything I've learned from all parts of my family. I want to lead with both formal wisdom and practical understanding, with both traditional knowledge and new ideas." The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. Many of the guests commented later that they had never heard such thoughtful remarks from someone so young. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Alexander found himself in the garden with his entire immediate family: Queen Isabella, King Ferdinand, Princess Catherine, and David. Lady Margaret had joined them, along with Professor Henrik, creating an unusual but harmonious group. "Alexander," King Ferdinand said, "I want you to know how proud I am of the way you've handled this challenging situation. You've shown maturity and wisdom beyond your years." "I've had good teachers," Alexander replied, looking around at all the adults who had contributed to his growth and understanding. Catherine spoke up quietly. "Alexander, I need you to know that watching you grow into such a thoughtful and kind person has been the greatest gift of my life. Even though I couldn't raise you myself, seeing the wonderful boy you've become makes every sacrifice worthwhile." Queen Isabella added, "You've taught all of us something important about the true meaning of family and love. You've shown us that families can be larger and more complex than traditional definitions suggest, and that there's room in a heart for many different kinds of love." As they sat together under the stars, Alexander felt a deep sense of contentment and belonging. The painful confusion of discovering his true parentage had transformed into a richer understanding of the many people who loved him and had contributed to making him who he was. "Will things keep changing?" Alexander asked, a question that had been on his mind often lately. Everything in life keeps changing, David answered with a smile. But some things stay constant. The love we all have for you will never change, no matter what else happens. Lady Margaret nodded in agreement. You'll keep growing and learning, Alexander. You'll face new challenges and discover new things about yourself and the world, but you'll always have this foundation of love and support to help you through whatever comes. As the evening ended and everyone prepared to return to their respective homes, Alexander felt ready for whatever changes the future might bring. He had learned that truth, even when it was initially painful, was better than living with lies. He had discovered that love was not diminished by being shared among many people, but rather multiplied and strengthened. Most importantly, he had begun to understand that his unique family situation, rather than being a source of shame or confusion, was actually a gift that had provided him with diverse perspectives and experiences that would make him a better leader and a better person. The young prince went to sleep that night surrounded by love from multiple directions. Secure in his identity as someone who belonged fully to a family that transcended traditional boundaries. He dreamed of building boats with David, learning statecraft from Queen Isabella, and working alongside Catherine to help children throughout the kingdom receive better education. In the months that followed, Alexander continued to thrive as he learned to balance his royal education with regular visits to Catherine and David's seaside home. These experiences helped him develop a deep understanding of both royal responsibilities and common people's lives, preparing him to become the kind of king who would serve all his subjects with wisdom, compassion, and genuine understanding. The boy who had once cried, "You're not my mother," had grown into a young prince who understood that the truth about family was far more beautiful and complex than he had ever imagined.